could ask you to dance, and you could say, well, I don't feel like dancing. And then I could say, well, maybe some other time. Or I could just not ask.
Diana, this is your future life we're talking about. You hardly know him. He's practically a stranger.
The thing is, I just know this is it. I love you, Robin.
I'm not feeling too good. I can't move. What's going on?
Robin?
Get him on a respirator!
People paralyzed by polio don't last long.
Can't move anything from the neck down. Can't even breathe for yourself. How do you live like this? Yes, you Suez.
I love you, and I want Jonathan to know you.
You can't love this.
Yes, I can. There must be something I can do.
Get me out of here.
Robin's going to leave the hospital.
No one with your husband's disability exists outside a hospital.
Has anyone ever tried? Robin! Robin! You're right, darling.
Much better.
£5 says he'll never make it.
You're on. Darling, call Teddy. I've had an idea.
A wheelchair that does his breathing for him.
Are you sure it's safe?
It's worked so far.
Robin,
You owe me £5.
scammy bastard.
Why do you keep your disabled people in prison?
No one's believed it's possible to live as you do.
Well, we should open the gates and set them free.
Bloody marvellous.
What now, Robin? A world tour?
Wouldn't that be an adventure? When I first became paralyzed, I wanted to die. My wife told me I had to live. See our son grow up.
Your life is my life.
I don't want to just survive. I want to truly live.
My love. My life.
Breathe.
I think he should be in hospital. No?
You're quite right. No.
Coming soon.
So, to me, that was really good. It's going to be a good movie. In fact, one of the producers is Robin Cavendish's son, John Cavendish, and he's going to come on board as a patron as well, so that's good news. But also, I was talking about how we could get involved with the film in some way. So, the launch of the film is at the BFI London Film Festival. But they're doing that in conjunction with the GPEI. But they also have a charity screening of the film where other polio charities will be there as well. And hopefully in time we'll find out how many tickets we're going to get, and we're going to find a way of getting some kind of system where a member might win tickets. So that's going to be on the 23rd of October at cinema in London somewhere. So I thought I'd just first of all, bring the film to your attention if you didn't know about it already, but also maybe look out for this potential chance to win the tickets. Thank you. I'm going to hand over now to Dr. Miner, who's a virologist and an expert on poliovirus. So he's going to speak about poliovirus. Thank you.
Thank you very much. A number of people have said to me, am I a doctor or a scientist? I'm a scientist, but I've got a PhD, so I'm a doctor. Okay? Just bear that in mind. What do you mean? No, you're right. I'm not a clinician. The characteristic feature of scientists is that they tend to be scruffy, okay? They tend to be slightly ditzy. So, for example, I turned up to this meeting last week, so I got the date wrong. And I've also come without a phone, so I don't know what the time is. I haven't got a pointer either, okay? So I'm going to carry on talking until you either tell me to shut up or you'll fall asleep. And by the way, I thought this morning's meeting was fabulous. That's exactly the kind of stuff that scientists love. This aggravating argumentation and God knows what else. It was just like being in the room. I'm not kidding. So, how do I actually get my... Oh, right, there we go. So I was head of the Division of Virology at the National Institute of Biological Standards and Control, which you've never heard of course. But we do a lot of testing of biological products like vaccines. And there was a lot of research work that was done on how vaccines work and how you know they're going to be safe and how you know they're going to be effective. And when I joined it, which was in about 1978, very little really was known about how polio vaccines work. And it's quite shocking, actually, because poliovirus was the major virus in the laboratory. People knew a lot about how it did it. Nobody ever looked at the vaccines from that point of view. And that's where I came into it. And it now has a very, very big polio program going. And I think it's an excellent polio program, I would, because I was involved in it. Okay. It has major, major links with WHO and the Global Polio Eradication Initiative, which is actually approaching the end. And that's really what I'm going to be talking about. However, there's a bit of prehistory to this, okay, and you may be familiar with this or you may not. In the Carlsberg Brewery business in Copenhagen, if you ever get to Copenhagen, do have a look at it because it's a real dynastic story here. Carlsberg Senior was Jacob Carlsberg, and he ran the brewery, and he was filthy rich. His son was called Carl Jacobsen because that's the way they do things in Denmark. Okay? And he was also a brewer, and they hated each other. Okay? The father was a scientist. He mixed with Louis Pasteur, who was probably the greatest microbiologist of all time. The son, on the other hand, decided, because he hated his father so much, he'd be an arty type. So he went around the world. They were both filthy rich, really filthy rich, because they drank a lot of beer in those days. Okay? So he went around the world collecting antiquities of various sorts, and eventually his house was so full of antiquities that he had to build a museum to put them all in. And that's the Carlsberg New Glyptotek. And if you come out of Copenhagen main station and you turn right, there's this big building on the corner, and that's it. Okay? And if you ever get there, I do strongly recommend you see it. The main reason why I look at this is because of this particular slide here. This is the funerary stele of the priest Rom or Roma. Okay, and it's just tucked away in the corner. They don't make a big thing out of it. To a virologist, this is a major relic. Okay? This is like the Turin shroud, if you like. Okay? This shows a priest, okay, or a scribe. Sorry, I'll go back. You may not be able to see it very well, but it's about 9 inches tall, about 6 inches across. Okay? This is Rom here. And what you can see is that he's got a perfectly normal left leg, and the right leg is withered. And just in case you think that's because the man couldn't draw properly, you notice that the foot is down flexed, and he's got a staff. Okay? This man has no muscle at all, if you like, in his right leg. Okay? And the easiest way to actually get that effect is by poliomyelitis, as you know very well. It's not necessarily the case that it is poliomyelitis. Anything that destroyed the motor innervation of his right leg would do this. Okay? But this looks like polio to everybody else. And most people would look at that and say, this is the first documented case of a disease in human beings caused by a virus, okay? Polio. Okay? What happened after that was basically nothing. Okay? You don't find references to poliomyelitis in the literature much. There are maybe half a dozen cases up to about the 18th century. In the 19th century, there are maybe a few more, but mostly you don't see it. Okay? And for something which is so wildly characteristic as this, so that people can actually diagnose it across crowded hotel lobbies in India, for example, that's so clearly diagnosable just by looking at it, okay? That's really quite surprising. And I think most people will conclude that it wasn't diagnosed, it doesn't turn up in the literature because it just didn't happen. Okay? So in the prehistoric period, if you like, there was no poliomyelitis up to about the middle of the 19th century. You get to the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, and suddenly there are huge, terrifying epidemics everywhere. And they really were very, very scary. Okay? Everybody was very, very uptight about this. It was the AIDS of its day, if you like. And by the time you get to the 1960s, or thereabouts, vaccines had been developed, particularly the Salk vaccine, the inactivated vaccine, and it was really becoming under control in developed countries. There was a view at the time that the vaccines didn't work very well in developing countries, and I'll go into that in a moment, because there was a reason for that. The vaccines were not used in the right way to do it. But at that time, it had really gone from the Western world. Okay? So when I went to my GP in 1980 and I said, I work on polio, he said, why? There is no polio, which is not true. It's other places, not here. So by 1960, it was more or less controlled. And people thought that the live vaccine did not work in developing countries. Okay? Right? So this was given the lie by Albert Sabin, who developed the live attenuated vaccine in the first place, when he showed how to use it in South America. And gradually, the developing countries began to get it under control. Okay? And finally, in 1988, WHO put a resolution for the World Health Assembly saying we are going to get rid of polio by the year 2000. Now, obviously, they failed, but they did pretty well on it anyway. And the position we're now in is getting rid of the vaccine at the end of it. And I'll talk about that later in a moment. So this is poliovirus, and I put it up because it's so pretty. Okay? Now, I'm a virologist, so I think this is beautiful. You may have a different view. So this is what it looks like, sort of, over here. So it's a polymer. It's got 20 faces, it's got 12 edges, it's got 12 ABCs, and so on and so forth. Okay? And it's, you know where every atom is in this particular molecule, in this particular agent, and that's, to me, that's stunning. I won't go into any more virological details because I don't think you could handle it. I could talk about this for hours, actually. Yeah.
Is that still in the body now?
Is it in your body now?
No.
Have you anybody who's had polio? No. No. Almost certainly not. Okay. Almost certainly not. Maybe I'll get onto that later, actually. It's a very question. And this shows some of the other fancy diados you can do with this particular structure. This is comparing a particular strain of virus with other parent viruses that it came from and showing where you see the mutations. So they're all nicely on the surface, which is really expected. This is very pretty, okay? And it's really, really well understood that it's, well, for me, it's beautiful. Okay? So this is pathogenesis, okay? And the question everybody asks is, why is it so difficult to get rid of polio? Like smallpox, we got rid of it in 1980. Why is polio so tricky? Okay? And this is the reason why. This is pathogenesis according to Albert Sabin. Okay? And what is significant about all pathogenesis slides is that they are completely incomprehensible. But what they've actually got in them is something very, very, very simple. And what we have here is this, that the virus enters through the mouth, or occasionally when you inhale it, perhaps respiratory transmission maybe. Mostly poliovirus is caught by drinking sewage in some form or diluted sewage. So it comes in there. It sets up shop in the intestines somehow, and provided it stays in the intestines, there's no issue. It's just that when it begins to leak out, that's when you have the problem. So it's in the intestine, you shed the virus in the feces, and that's the cycle that basically goes on. You excrete sewage, excrete it in the feces, and there's more sewage to be drunk by the next person that comes along. What will also happen is that after it's in the intestine somewhere, we don't really know where, it will break out into the local lymph nodes here, doesn't really matter where. You get a little bit of virus present in the blood, and that will seed other things outside the intestine. Okay. So other susceptible extraneural tissues, whatever they are. Okay. And eventually that will cause a larger amount of virus in the blood, and it will then go back and maybe can infect the central nervous system, which is where you get classic poliomyelitis from. Right? So you can see it's a sort of three-step process. You infect the intestine, you get a bit of blood, you infect something else, you then get infection in the central nervous system. So you can block this at any stage, basically. And particularly if you've got antibodies in your blood, when the virus breaks out of the intestine, it gets neutralized and it doesn't go anywhere. Okay, so it stays in the intestine. And that is the accepted view for why there was no poliomyelitis until the end of the 19th century. That hygiene was reasonably poor, so that babies were basically paddling in raw sewage all the time. They got exposed to it while they still had protection from their mother with the antibodies, if you like. So you could set up shop, harmlessly stay in the intestine, and there would be no issues with it. And also notice, actually, one other thing, that the inactivated vaccine, which is the Salk vaccine, which is the one which we are now switching over to everywhere, okay, will generate antibodies in the blood, but it won't do much about infecting your intestine. Okay? The oral polio vaccine, which imitates a natural infection with polio, will supposedly stop infection of the intestine proper. Right? So if you want to break transmission, I'm getting ahead of myself, they do two different things as well. So we have two types, the inactivated vaccine, which was produced by Jonas Salk in the 1950s. I had that one, among other things. Yeah, yeah.
I had that one instead.
Yeah, quite. Okay, never mind. Yes. So there was that one. And then the oral polio vaccine, which Sabin devised about the same time, was introduced in this country in 1963. And it took over from the Salk vaccine because it was cheaper to make, it was easier to give. There was an ongoing savage argument between Sabin and Salk about what was the best way of getting rid of this. And frankly, they didn't talk to each other for a long time. I had the privilege of seeing them on the same platform in 1983, which was the first time they'd been together for about 30 years. They really hated each other. Salk said he was right, Sabin said he was right, and it just went on like that for a long time. The Sabin vaccine is one that forms the backbone of the eradication program. So here are the scientific difficulties of polio eradication. The first thing is that because if your virus is confined to the intestine, which is mostly what it is, most of your infections are silent, so you don't know you've got it. Okay? The only way you can know you've got it is by some really quite careful fancy lab investigations. And you can't do that on the entire population of the world, or most of the population of the world. So there's no simple way to tell if someone's infected or if they're infectious. And when people put people into quarantine, which they used to do back in the 50s, it was a waste of time, because by the time you get the disease, you've been excreting the virus for 10 days, 2 weeks, something like that. You've had a good chance to spread it to everybody else. So quarantine just doesn't work with polio, actually, believe it or not. You count the cases, if you like, which is the way WHO do it, and say, have we got it under control or not? Okay. That's just a surrogate of infection. 1% or so of infections may lead on to poliomyelitis. If you're just counting the cases, that means you're missing 99% of your infections. So it's an indication, if you like, but it's not necessarily an accurate indication. That leads on to the third point, which is that if you're going to get rid of this agent, you must eradicate the agent. You don't just eradicate the disease. Okay? And that's absolutely crucial. You must get rid of the agent. That's probably true of any eradication program, but for polio it's essential. You can't do it any other way. And there's also no way to say someone's been vaccinated without laboratory follow-up. So in the case of smallpox, you could tell when people have been vaccinated because they had a scar on their eyes, I have, and I expect many of you have as well. You can say, that's a smallpox vaccination, they've been done. Okay? Polio, you can't do that. There's absolutely no sign of it at all. Okay? So it's a very tricky thing. It requires a lot of laboratory backup to actually do it properly. Okay? And that really is what it gets. Wild-type poliomyelitis. Okay. So what is the state of wild-type polio? I'm not sure I've got the right slides up here, actually. I hope I've got the right pictures in here later on. Anyway, do that. So 2 ways you can actually use a vaccine. Okay? And the way we would use it in this country would be to focus on the individual. And what you say is, my baby is now 2 months old, 4 months old, I will give it vaccine to protect it. Okay? And you're focusing on the child. If you do that in this country, that's okay, because it's a very seasonal disease. So if you immunise throughout the year, in the winter, you build up this big population of people who are not susceptible to polio infections, so that you reduce the number which is going to be there to maintain circulation of the virus. Right? If you go to somewhere like a tropical country, the infection is all year round, so it doesn't work like that. It's not half so seasonal. Okay? So if you just do this strategy to protect the individual by immunising at the right age, it doesn't work. And that really was half the reason why people thought that oral polio vaccines didn't work in developing countries. Albert Sabin had done work earlier on than that to say that there is another way of using his vaccine, which is you go and you swamp the entire country with everything. So every child that walks past basically gets a shot of oral polio vaccine, whether they need it or not, whatever age they are. And if you do that properly a couple of times, you will actually break transmission. And that really is what happened. This shows. Okay. So what happened then was that by 1988 or thereabouts, this strategy of going in there and swamping the country with oral polio vaccine had really worked quite well in areas where people thought it wasn't going to work at all. It's like South America, for example, began to be polio-free, if you will. So WHO passed a resolution saying we will eradicate polio by the year 2000, which of course they failed to do. But by 2000, they really got rid of polio from all sorts of places that you would not have thought would have necessarily got rid of polio, and including China, for example. So, for example, China in about 1989, 1990, or thereabouts, immunised all their children under the age of 5 in 1 week. Okay, so that's, you think about that, that's a quarter of the world's children suddenly got immunised just in 7 days. I think it makes my jaw drop even to think about it now. India did an awful lot of immunisations as well. Okay? And they would do national immunisation days, or NIDs, NIDs. Okay? They would immunise 120 million children in a day. Okay? Incredible. I mean, what happens? I mean, how do they do this? I just don't know. Okay? This shows the state of things recently, okay, around June, July, thereabouts. Okay? And what we have here is a number of wild-type strains down here. Sorry, this was 2016. There are a certain number, okay, so in August 2016 there were 4 cases of polio in Africa, and there were 22 or so in Afghanistan and Pakistan. Well, at that point, polio, wild-type polio circulation had gone from India, and that was a miracle in its own right, which I hope I'm going to show you in a minute. But it was still present in Nigeria and in Afghanistan and in Pakistan. And this illustrates one of the big problems here, because Nigeria had not had a case of polio since 2012, at least anybody noticed. And then suddenly in August 2000 last year, 4 cases or so actually appeared out of a clear blue sky. And the reason for this is that there are problems of access. But what you have in Nigeria is Boko Haram controlling the central bit. Okay? Nobody knows what's going on in there, except you know there's no vaccination going on. Vaccine-preventable diseases are rife in there, not just polio. And the thing is, it's big enough that it can actually sustain polio transmission over a period of time. So there's an issue about access, about how do you know you've got rid of it. Okay? For Afghanistan, it's not bad at all. The Taliban are way, way, way behind the program, and they really do put their elbows to it. So the Taliban are actually quite good in Afghanistan. They're maybe not quite so good in Pakistan, because they tend to kill immunisers, which is not a good thing to do. But these are some of the issues that crop up when you're actually doing the programme, to make sure you get it to the right place at the right time, and you have to do it and make sure that everybody gets what they need to get. So that's the situation there. You've got a couple of other issues here. In Guinea here, there's a couple of green blocks. These are vaccine-derived polioviruses, so they're circulating vaccine-derived strains. What happens when the saving strain gets put into a child is that the child will excrete it for 30 days or more, during which time the virus can actually change an awful lot. If the child is actually shedding this into a population which doesn't have a lot of immunity to that particular virus, you can get viruses that will spread from person to person. And if they spread from person to person, they can start to cause disease. And that's what they do. And these are essentially equivalent to wild-type viruses, okay, in terms of how well they spread and how will they cause disease. So the vaccine becomes an issue. And you can see there's something over in Laos as well, which is type 1. This is a slide which illustrates the need to actually make sure that if you're going to eradicate polio, you eradicate it everywhere. Previous to this, about 2002-03, it really looked quite good. There was polio in Nigeria and Niger. There was polio in India. There was a bit of polio in Egypt. There was a bit of polio in Pakistan, Afghanistan. But everywhere else it looked like it was under control. And then around 2003 or thereabouts, the northern part of Nigeria decided that this was an American plot to sterilise their girl babies. Okay? So that was the rumour that went around. Vaccination stopped in northern Nigeria. Okay? And Nigeria had an awful lot of polio in it. And over the next period, it spread across the whole of Central Africa. So it all began to leak out. And you can tell one strain from another just by doing some nucleic acid sequence, but we won't go into that very much. So it's across the entirety of Central Africa here, over there. And you also see that there's some in the Yemen here, and there's some in Indonesia down here. And all of these were Nigerian strains. And the route which was followed here was that the northern Nigerians are largely Muslim. They went on the Hajj, and at Hajj everybody mixes in with everybody else, and it went out to Yemen and Indonesia as well. That has some interesting implications actually, because the Hajj is mainly done by adults, and nobody's immunising adults, we just immunise babies. So it looks like adults can take it with them if they feel they do. The message of this is that if you don't eradicate it from everywhere, the entire world is at risk. Okay? And I think that's a very, very strong message from things like this. And it also happened quite a lot elsewhere as well. There's stuff exported from northern India to various parts of Africa and so on. But this was a very, very strong image to me, that you have to get rid of the virus. You can't just mess around with it. So, the current position is this. I basically said this already, so maybe I don't need to say it again. But wild type 1 is in Pakistan and Afghanistan. Vaccination programs there are not easy, but they are carrying on, if you like. In 2016, there were cases in Nigeria, which were new because they came out of the Boko Haram controlled area, which is, I mentioned this to Roland Sutter, who runs the program. I said, why can't you do something about it? And he said, they're not people that you can reason with. They chop your head off with a chainsaw as soon as they look at you. So I think there's a certain element of reserve about going in there and taking them on. And the strategy that's going to be followed is to basically quarantine Nigeria with vaccine all the way around it and hope for the best, I think. That doesn't seem a long-term solution to me. There's no wild type 3 case recorded since 2013. So there are 3 serotypes of polio, 1, 2 and 3. 2 was gone in 1999. There's been no type 3 since 2012. It looks like we've got rid of 2 of the 3 serotypes, if you like. There was an outbreak of type 1 in Syria, in northern Syria, about a couple of years ago. Okay? And there was a lot of panic about it on the BBC. They were saying this is the end of it, because look, we've got this appalling state of war going on in Syria. It's going to spread to refugee camps and everything else. The programme were not worried about this at all. Okay? And they are really quite ruthless in how they actually try and introduce immunisation. They will talk to absolutely anybody, and it doesn't matter whether you're dropping chemical weapons on your staff or you're cutting people's heads off. They will talk to you to get the vaccine actually done, and that's essentially what happened. They got it under control. What you now have in Syria, of course, is the type 2 strain actually being a problem. So that's the wild type. Okay, so that's like the real virus out there, if you like. Okay. But oral polio vaccine is an issue. It's becoming the big issue, I think, at the very end game of how polio works out. So there are a number of things that can go wrong with the oral polio vaccine. One is you can get vaccine-associated poliomyelitis. Okay? So in rare cases, it's supposed to be 1.5 million to 1 3/4 million primary recipients. Okay? You can get poliomyelitis caused by the vaccine or by their close contacts. And that's because the virus goes in, it replicates, it changes, and it can shed on to your adjacent people. So vaccine-associated polio has been recognised for a long time. At least since I've been working on it, because that was the first thing I began to work on, was this vaccine associated or not, and it was, basically. There are CVD-PVs, that's circulating vaccine-derived polioviruses. What happens here is that the child is excreting the virus, or the person is excreting the virus, and they come across somebody who is still susceptible to the virus, and then you can get transmission from the first child to the second child, and from the second child to the third child, and so on. It's not inevitable, and it's not necessarily very common, but it can happen. And once you've got the virus that's circulating, it can do what it likes, okay? And in particular, it can become virulent if it wants to. And essentially, those become more or less like wild-type strains, whether they are vaccine-derived. There are IVD-PVs. There are people who don't have human antibody, so they're primary immune deficients. They are very susceptible to polio, and they are very susceptible to other kind of enteric viruses that may linger in your gut. There are examples of people with this kind of syndrome going on excreting virus for a very long time. Britain has the world record holder who's been going on for 30 years. Okay? And what he's doing is excreting a type 2 virus, which is very virulent, very unpleasant, and it doesn't look like there's much chance of it disappearing without some really serious active intervention, which we've tried, by the way. If anybody wants to know, I can talk about that later. And finally, there's AVD-PVs, which are atypical vaccine-derived viruses. There's a lot of work going on looking at sewage. Okay, you go out and you dip a bucket and you see what's in it. Apart from the obvious, you're looking for viruses. And you can turn up vaccine-derived viruses, which are clearly highly drifted compared to what the vaccine looked like. And presumably those are probably coming from immune deficients, but you don't know where they are. And you don't know where they are because immune deficients are not showing any symptoms, because that's the nature of polio infection. So how you deal with this is, firstly, for the VAPs, what you do is you stop using OPV. And in this country, we stopped using it in 2004. We now use only inactivated polio vaccines, so there's none of those in there. CVD-PVs, you stop using oral polio vaccine, but you also try and mop up the circulating vaccines by pretending there's a Lyme virus there, which can work. IVD-PVs, there is no treatment for that yet, but there are a number of chemotherapeutic agents that people are actually trying to look at to try and see if they can do something about it. And the AVDPPs, nobody knows even where they come from. So it's a slightly bit of a problematic element. What happened then in 2016 or thereabouts was that people said polio's not been, type 2 polio's not been here since 1999, which is true. So this is what I got written down here. Most of the vaccine-associated polio cases are caused by type 2, the regular trivalent vaccine. Most of them are type 2. Most circulating vaccine-derived polios are also type 2. Most IVDPVs, that's the immunodeficient things, are also type 2. So basically what you're doing is giving type 2 vaccine to protect against type 2 vaccine that you're giving to protect against type 2 vaccine. It's not logical at all. It's just ridiculous, right? Not only that, but the type 2 component is the most effective of the three. So that if you go with a trivalent vaccine with 1, 2, and 3 in it, basically type 2 will compete out all the other two. And it's the only type 1 that you're really interested in. So it's stupid to actually carry on using it. But how do you drop it? You have to take it out of all oral polio vaccines at the same time, because if you're going in with your national immunisation day with just a bivalent vaccine, type 1 or type 3, you leave a lot of people who are susceptible to type 2, so it's got to go from the routine usage as well. You've got to eliminate any CVDPV before you do this. You have to have something up your sleeve just in case a type 2 suddenly appears out of the woodwork, so you need to have some sort of reserve there just to react if you need to react to it. A single dose of inactivated polio vaccine has been given, or supposed to have been given anyway, with a view to protecting people against type 2, for example. And after that, what you're really worried about is the source of other type 2 viruses that may be out there, which is probably going to be things like vaccine manufacturers. Right? And that's a major issue for the moment. It was withdrawn in 2016, and everybody should now have all their type 2 polio viruses under high containment, and they don't. And in particular, our Brit who's excreted this stuff is not in containment at all. He's out there walking loose as a goose. This shows number of cases to September the 12th. Okay? And I think you can see from this, and I'll stop right after this, actually, because I'm getting waved at by my chair. Okay? In 2016, you had 8 wild types in Afghanistan, you had 13 in Pakistan, you had 3 in Nigeria. This year, you've got 6 in Afghanistan and 4 in Pakistan. That's not major progress, I don't think. And that's more or less the status quo as it was before. It's probable that there are cases in Nigeria that you don't know. The one thing which is different between the two is this here, that there's a CDVP2 outbreak going on in Syria, which people are struggling to actually control. So to actually get this under control and trying to get it wiped out, it's a very slippery thing. It's like squeezing a jellyfish into a jam jar. You know, you think you've got it all in there, and then it comes out somewhere else. The implications. I don't think I'll bother with this. There is a, well, no, I will. I just bother with this. Okay. This is a document which has been produced by WHO that says how you must handle your polio viruses. And it's a very, very heavy document indeed. And it's very, very difficult to comply with, but people are now beginning to comply with it. And this is a major issue for me at the moment, and also for NIBSC. I think maybe should I stop there? Sorry. He says please. so I'll stop there for the moment. Okay.
Questions?
Okay, so it's working. You didn't mention your own heroic experiments of isolating virus from your children's dirty nappies over a long period after vaccination in the minor experiments. But, I mean, you did this work in the 80s, I think. You were heavily involved in showing that there are far fewer mutations to attenuate HPV2. But
over the time since, what's been done to get site-directed mutagenesis of type 2 to increase? This is what you might call what I would say is heavyweight virology, so I was deliberately staying off that. But I've got backup slides here that I can talk to you about. The heroic experiments that were described were as follows. My son was born in 1983 in July. Okay? He was immunised against polio at the age of about 3 or 4 months in October. Okay? If you can remember what your brain was like when your first child was born, you'll appreciate you don't sleep, do you? Okay? And your brain basically turns to boiled cabbage, right? Okay? So the idea was, well, he's being immunised, we'll get something out of it. Okay? So what we did was we collected stool specimens from him for about the first year of life. Okay? I'm one of the few fathers in this room, I suspect, who can say that I've actually got access to such a collection of stool specimens. Anybody? Okay. My daughter was born in 1985 and she had the same humiliation foisted on her. And the idea was to say, it goes in there and it affects. What happens? You see, I mean, what happens to the virus inside the child? And what happens is that it changes like mad, very, very rapidly. Very, very rapidly, it adapts to the gut and it grows well, and then it adapts to the gut slightly better, it grows better, and it's all. Okay? This is a very, very malleable virus that can actually do all this kind of stuff. And if you look at the mutations that change, there may be ways to actually nail them together, okay, so that they don't change. Okay? And that's one of the things that we've been doing at the NIPS. Okay? And there's a strain called S19, which I'm pushing like mad, which I think is a wonderful, wonderful strain that will never infect anybody. Okay? So you could use this for making an activated polio vaccine, and if the plant blows up, who cares? Because nobody's going to get infected with it. So this is my view. I can show you the pictures later. Yeah. There's a lot of serious science in this whole area.
I have been told there are 3 different strains. Is that true? I have been told there are 3 different strains of the virus, and you may have got one strain, but you may get the other strain later on.
Right.
Is that true?
In theory, I think it is. Okay, so you've got 3 serotypes of polio: type 1, type 2, type 3. If you look at the antibodies that come out of infection with the type 1, they rarely neutralise type 2 or type 3. Okay? So the idea is that if you had type 1, in principle, you could get type 2 or type 3 again. Okay? This would be really, really bad luck, wouldn't it? Because the chances the first time around is 1 in 100. That's if it's a type 1. If it's a type 2, the chances are more like 1 in 10,000. Right? So you're 1 in 100,000 or whatever it is, 1 in a million actually. So the chances of it actually happening are really quite small. But in principle, it has been said that that is what would happen. I don't know of any case where it's been shown. Okay? But you could do it in principle. And there are 3 serotypes, okay? Just 1, 2, 3, and they're quite independent beasts.
I got it in 1959, just at the end of the epidemic. And I did have the vaccine and the shut-ups about 4 months before I got it. No luck.
I don't know how that works. I mean, that sounds like more than hard luck to me.
It's a big epidemic.
Just one more question, then we need to move on. We can't have back. So, last question, thank you.
I'll try and do it quickly, this one. The salt vaccine is an inactivated vaccine. But it's inactivated by formalin. Does that mean it was a living thing? Because when I studied biology years ago, I was told that viruses were chemical and that bacteria were living. But now it looks like a virus is actually a living thing.
It depends on your definition of living. So you can't grow the virus without actually having a cell for it to infect. The virus on its own doesn't do anything until it hits something that it can infect, take over and reproduce. So it's a bit like exactly like a computer virus. Okay? It'll go in and reproduce itself. Okay? The Salk vaccine is made by growing shed loads of the virus in a tissue culture system and then bashing it with a bit of formalin, as you say. So once it's been hit with formalin, carefully, okay, generally speaking, it's perfectly safe. Okay? Before it's been hit with formalin, it's a bit more dodgy. Okay? And for its worth, GSK tipped 45 litres of type 3 live polio virus into the local river in 2014. Okay? That was about 10 to the 13 infectious units, which is not something you really want to do more than once, I don't think. I don't think they wanted to do it at all.
It's working suspected. Sorry, it's suspected that mine wasn't fully inactivated by Glaxo just outside Newcastle in an unknown bat. So when I got the Salk vaccine, it's quite suspected that I actually contracted polio from a not fully inactivated bat.
In 1955, there was a thing called the Cutter incident.
Yeah, 57 when I...
Right.
Phil, I think at that stage they didn't realise formalin was a biphasic reaction. They looked at first order kinetics, and they got it wrong. How they
Well, the reason for the cutter incident that everybody buys is that it was clumps. So you wind up with aggregates of virus that we formerly couldn't actually penetrate. And it's quite a delicate process to actually inactivate it without actually destroying the antigen as well. So they were very careful about that. But since then, my understanding of it is you introduce your filtrations to get rid of the clumps before and after. And so far as I know, there's never been a case of vaccine-associated IPV since the cutter incident of around the 50s. Thereabout.
We think there was a few of the like 50s in England.
Were there? Okay. I'll talk to you about that in a minute. Yeah, okay.
Sorry, can we could ask a bit later if that's right? We need to move on now timing wise. Thank you very much, Dr. Nigel. Now it's going to be John Taylor. And John's going to be talking about care.
Good afternoon, everybody. For those that you don't know me, I'm John Taylor, Chairman of the Yorkshire Region and volunteer in the fellowship for the last 34 years. But I don't mean to say I know an awful lot, because I think you're learning every day when you're round polios. That's as long as you listen. I'd give you a little bit of background. On your agenda, it says community care. I don't want anybody to think that that is the same thing as care in the community, because that's a kind of council thing. In Yorkshire, we call it the Yorkshire Sport Team, and I'll explain why it came about. Just to give you a little bit of background, and I'm sure other regions are finding this as well, that over a period of time, branches are closing, not because there aren't any members, but because there's nobody that actually wants to be a chairman or a secretary or a treasurer. So the branches are closing. That created, as far as I was concerned in Yorkshire, some concern that what was happening to these people who no longer had a branch secretary to go to. For those of you old enough to remember, the original symbol for the fellowship was a chain link. And my worry was that the link was being broken, the chain was being broken. So how could we do something about that? About 4 or 5 years before this, though, we'd instigated a buddy system in Yorkshire because we had quite a lot of housebound people with little or no family. So we had the buddy system where a friend within the fellowship would ring somebody else on a not overly regular basis, but we all know, if we're in the fellowship, how important chat is. So just to have a chat, not necessarily for information, just a normal chat. So the idea was then that we would extend this and make it a support team. So we sent a central office for a full membership list of Yorkshire, and 2 people took on board the job of ringing the people from the closed branches. Now it's important that if you're going to do this, you need to put 1 or 2 things in place first. 1, you need to tell the central office you're doing it and give them the name of the people who are going to ring. Because your first phone call needs to be very simple, and it needs to be, good morning, I'm Jo Soap, I'm a volunteer for the British Polio Fellowship. If you want to check up on me, because I think we should all be very, very aware of the strange phone calls, the strange internet scams, whatever. So the central office need to know who are making these phone calls. So you need to give the member the free phone number. Don't be worried that you're giving central office an awful lot of more work to do, because in the 5 years that we've been running this scheme, nobody has rung up to check up on us. And we think that's probably because the fact that you up front, you're saying, this is who I am, this is why I'm ringing you, check up on me. The fact that you're giving them a free phone number, it doesn't look like a weird number that they've to ring. So that's alleviating the worry. So how does it work? Basically, you gain people's trust. First thing you must always say is, have you got time to talk to me? Because there's nothing worse, is there? You know, you've got a cake in the oven, or you're just about to sit down to dinner and some idiot rings you up. So make sure it's convenient, and if it is, well, would you like me to ring back at another time? They might say no, but in my experience, and we've been doing this now 5 years plus, we have only had 2 people who have said, please don't ring me again, I don't want contact. And that to me says an awful lot. We don't give out benefits information. We don't give out other sort of technical information, benefits or care or whatever. In Yorkshire we are very, very fortunate that we have got a welfare officer who is very, very knowledgeable. And to preserve confidentiality, if by chatting to somebody you realise that they do need help, be it benefit or care or appliances, we will then say to them, do you mind if I give your name and number to our welfare officer and she will ring you back? We don't actually give her number out, again, because you need to monitor it. So the minute that happens, we then call it a referral, which goes on email. That way you've got a paper trail, or should I say a cyber trail, so that you always know who you've rung, what the outcome is. But once it's handed over to the welfare officer, that's it. She deals with it. Confidentiality is maintained until the issue is resolved, and then it comes back. So we started this with the people who no longer had a branch to turn to. It then extended and it went to people within the region that are central office members. Now, contrary to what was said in the AGM, we have found that if you ring a central office member and tell them what's happening in the region, quite often they'll say, oh, can I come to that? Can I be affiliated to this branch or that branch? Because they realise the importance of fellowship, friendship, care, understanding, like-minded people. It's not rocket science, it's what we were set up to do, to care for each other. I've written loads of notes, but at the end of the day, most of you that know me, I would much rather speak from here than from here. And friendship, fellowship, caring should be our watchword. A few weeks ago in Yorkshire, we had a 1940s party. The entertainment was a ukulele band, and one of the songs they played was Side by Side. And the more I listened to the words, the more I thought, that should be the fellowship signature tune, because side by side we can conquer a lot of things and we can care for each other. I'm not going to rabbit on because coffee will be ready and I'm sure you've heard enough, but if you want any help or any idea how to set this up, it's dead easy. You don't need to be computer literate. A bit of paper and a pencil will do, as long as you keep a record of who you've rung and whether they've needed referring. If you haven't got a welfare officer, that's when you would refer them back to central office. But it's dead easy, and it means we are maintaining the link. Thank you.
Any questions for John? Any questions?
Where's tea? Where's a cup of tea?
So, in that case, let's go and get a cup of tea or coffee at the back. So, thank you everybody. Thank you, Jan. That was amazing.
introductions earlier, and now I'm going to hand you over to Ahmed, who's going to be talking about the hedgehog and BPF trading.
Hello everyone. Yeah, on the back. No? Can you hear me please? Great, okay. Thank you again to Dr. Miner and Jan for a wonderful presentation. I've been told I've got 10 minutes for this presentation.
10 seconds.
So it'll be a speedy one, but I'm here after the day's event. If anyone wants to try the wheelchair, the hedgehog.
The hedgehog will be speedy as well.
It is speedy. We've got this website sorted for inquiries. I've just been told we've had about 1,000 inquiries. Unique inquiries. Unique inquiries on the website. So, a bit about the hedgehog, the background of the hedgehog. About a year ago, we had inquiries about the needs of members wanting, before they got their prescription wheelchair, wanting to have an aid of some kind so they could keep their mobility for a longer period. So they've got walking sticks, they've got a crutch, but they get tired when they go to the shops. How do you carry on with without getting too much fatigue? How do you carry on? And so there's a need for something, and we put our thinking hats on, and that's when we came up with the idea of a wheelchair that was light, that could be put away into a car, and be taken out when you needed it to go to the shopping centre, spend a couple of hours shopping, come back, and still be able to make your tea, and be with the children and grandchildren, so you won't get too tired. And we then, at the same time, we were looking at what this product was. We were approached by a chap in Monaco, one of our members in Monaco, who had found something exactly like what we were seeking. And we then researched as to who the manufacturer was, found the company based in Shanghai, imported one of these chairs, and then sent it to members around the country to try out. And that took a year. So members had the chair for 2 or 3 weeks at a time, and we then got the feedback, some very positive feedback and some not so positive feedback, but the not so positive one was more about how to improve it. And those things are, as we were taken on board. That was about a year ago. Since then, we've after the survey, the board then said the next stage would be to check the factory itself to make sure that there wasn't any quality or ethical issues out in China where they were manufacturing the chair. So we then conducted a survey out in Shanghai, and we went and visited 3 factories, 2 offices, did a full report, that came back good. The board then gave us the go-ahead to go to the next stage, which is to prepare the company itself, which is what we've now done. So we've now got a company, BPF Trading, separate from the fellowship. That's to make sure that the risks are minimised. And we've launched this product. So it's a chair, 21.5 kilos in weight, 2 lithium-ion batteries. It does nearly 20 miles on a full charge, 5 hours to recharge the battery. Can take an 18.5 kilo person. It's 120 kilo person, 18.5 stone person. And we've had some inquiries. Before we sell, we'll make sure that the person buying is suited to the chair. So we do a very detailed assessment. So we anti-sell it. So we make sure that they've got someone who can lift it and put it into a car. There's no point selling a folding wheelchair if you're disabled and you can't lift it. Or they've got access to a hoist, a wheelchair hoist. We make sure they can understand the highway code that relates to powered wheelchairs, that they can read a sign, a number plate at 12 meters, which is the minimum requirement for driving. So all those basic things we do before we actually sell, and the selling process ensures that the people buying it are they're not just buying it on a whim, they're buying it because they need to. We also make sure that the chair fits them, so that it's, although we've got a demo in the hall at the back, that's just, as I said, just a demo. We'll make sure that the seat depth, the seat width, and the drop between the seat and the footplate is accurately measured and made by the factory, so it's in other words bespoke made for you. That brings me now to, has anyone seen this? Anyone seen this website? Yeah. You've seen this website. I'll just flick through a couple of pages. So there's some basic questions. Most of those are self-explanatory now that we looked at those. I've got, there's a terms and conditions, detailed terms and conditions. I've got several copies in the back of the hall if you need. Anyone needs to see those. Any questions?
Well, it is a pity, comment. Is it not a pity that this sort of thing could not be made in a factory in this country?
That's the problem. I agree. I mean, we've lost, well, there isn't anyone making anything like this. We obviously would check, but there isn't anyone making anything of this type, of the quality, and in other words, the price that we can make it for in this country. So we're importing it, we import the chair, we add on our admin costs, cover our costs, delivery costs, and that's it. So you can buy something very similar from other commercial sellers, and where this is, I think, priced at $18.50 plus delivery, and commercial sellers are selling it at about £3,000. So that shows the difference. So we're not in the market to make a profit, we're simply making sure our members benefit from the product that's available. If it was made, if you could find someone who wants to make it at that price in this country, that'd be wonderful. We've just save on the time it takes to actually bring it to the UK.
But going on from that, it's made in Shanghai. Has the BPF got the sole UK import rights for it, trading rights, or do other people sell the same thing?
Very, very good question. The answer to that is we've got the sole import rights for this particular model, but it doesn't take very much. It doesn't take very much for the model to be amended ever so slightly, and for us not to have the rights to that particular model. But in principle, we've got a good agreement with the manufacturers, and we're on very good terms with them. We don't expect them to go behind the back.
If you sell enough,
yes,
they'll be happy to stick with you.
Oh, absolutely. So the idea is that we essentially, this is how I see it is that this is, I'm not sure if I said it at the very beginning, pre-prescription. So we don't want people to be in the stage where they're required in a wheelchair 24/7. This chair is for them. So it's for those people who have quite a lot of mobility now, but they get tired, and this saves them getting tired and being able to pace themselves better. So there's a number of people in the, I would say, probably the majority of our membership who are in that position, and there's this shame for them to wait another 10 years before they can't work anymore. They get the NHS wheelchair where it's too late then. So we want them to enjoy their life now, and this is just a tool to help them along. So it's not, as it were, I think I had conversations at the early stages about a year ago when people said, by the time you've got to a wheelchair, you've lost the battle. Well, this is in my mind, that's the wrong approach, because this isn't, as it were, you're not in the wheelchair forever, you're simply just using it when you need it, and then you're out of it when you don't need it, and just you put it back in the car. What do you think, gentlemen? Yes? Happy, good. Any other questions? No more questions? I've done my 10 minutes.
Thank you. So, comments around. Oh, there is a question.
Yes.
Sorry, like you said, keep it in the car ready for use. How long will the battery be charged?
How long does it last?
Well, no. If you're not using it, I'm just thinking for the members, if they have one, they want it.
I've had one uncharged for 3 months, and I take it out, it works fine.
Oh, that's good, because I have tools at home, and every time I want to use one, battery's dead.
Stand by.
About 3 months, no problem.
Thank you very much, Ahmed. That's brilliant. He's here. If any more queries about the head job, he's happy to field them. So, and do try it out while he's here as well. Georgina's got a question. Sorry, one question.
Yeah, given that this is being sold by a company from Shanghai, what happens in the event, I mean obviously it will have a warranty, what happens if something goes wrong with it once the warranty has expired?
Thank you, Gina. That's a brilliant question. The warranty, the chair comes with a warranty from the factory, 3 years for the frame, 2 years for the battery, 2 years for the controller. We, BPF, are dying for our members as a mandatory warranty another year on top of that. So we ensure, and if there's any problems, you come back to us. You get, if it's defective, you get a new chair. We'll replace whatever's broken. So that's our whole point. So if you buy something similar online from another country, well, you deal with that yourself. Whereas what we're doing is we're taking that responsibility on for you. So if there's a problem with the chair, you come to us. Okay.
Thank you, Ahmed. We're coming to our last speaker now, but we've got Alistair talking about polio and well-being.
Let's hope so. Exactly. That working? Hi everyone, I'm Ali Kinnear, and probably very few of you actually know me, but probably 40 years ago I was still in the swimming in the National Gala, and some of you might remember I was a wee uppity little teenager that used to pull in the police cadets into the water with the tracksuits on. I'm just going to share with you why I'm standing here with you, taking some of your time, because I've come a long way in my journey. I want to share some of that journey with you so that you understand why I'm standing here and how I'm able to stand here. So, I think my records show it's vaccine-derived polio at the age of 2 in Edinburgh, only case in Scotland in 1960. Surprised at 63. Shut up at the back. I can hear you. Sorry, vaccine-derived polio, I think the record shows, maybe I have a discussion because it was 63, they brought in the live one, he said that at 60 I got it, and we believe it's from the vaccine. No matter, like most of you, you just get on with it. I don't remember, I'm not going to regale you with lots of memories and stories. The one thing I will say that made a huge difference in my life as a really small kid was the British Polio Fellowship hired the Warrender baths in Edinburgh on a Wednesday morning, and the water was warm like a hot bath. And all the polios and lots of other people came every Wednesday morning, and I learned to swim at a very young age, because the volunteers there were brilliant. And what that did was that when I went to school, and I was an active little kid, the leg was useless, but I was active. I got to play football with the boys. Tubby Johnson's dog was picked before me in the team list, but you know, it was fascinating. But I was active, and I was encouraged to be active, so I swam a lot, and I was really fit during my teenage years. And because of learning to swim early, I had a little bit of advantage in the classroom because all the popular boys that played football, aged 10, 11, 12, I could swim better. I was the top dog at the swimming, and I had a coach who kept putting awards in front of me to go for. And so I stayed ahead. I meant to bring with me, I think I've got a 12-year-old tracksuit with every badge you can possibly get, including one you had to be 15 to get. So I was encouraged, I was swimming, I was fit. I went on to play water polo, and during that period, I had no problems. I didn't see the limit. We don't see the limit, do we? Our brains take it out. It's only when you see it in the window of a shop as you're walking along and oh, shit, that's better. Maybe I'll just walk. And from that period, I just decided something in me stopped me playing water polo and swimming anymore. I just knew it was enough. That was about age 21. I went travelling, met my wife, started a family, and went into business, jobs, stuff. The point was, there was no real issue. But in my 20s, and I put it down to because of how much work I did in the teenage years, I was aware I had a problem. Something was going wrong, and the medical profession said, nah, I can't find anything. I went back, and in the late 20s, got young kids, I was running out of energy, so you start, I must be overweight, I must be unfit. I was overweight, I was unfit. So I went back to training. And I remember distinctly, I went back to the swimming club, Portobello Amateur Swimming Club. And I went back and was training. I remember one of the coaches saying, well, how's it going after a few weeks? I said, my heart and lungs are no problem. The muscles are not responding. So what do you do? As an athlete, you train harder. I did that, and it wasn't good. But I stopped. I went to the doctors. I thought I had a thyroid problem. I thought it must be some other adrenal or something, because post-polio wasn't a thing. And I was finding it out early. But luckily, in my 30s, I hit the internet. I was a very early adopter. I had to start a new business. I got into the internet, and I found this stuff coming out of America about post-polio. And at that time, of course, you go to a doctor with something off the internet. Internet. Now, of course, the doctors need the internet to find what's wrong with you. In that period where I knew there was something wrong and I wasn't doing anything, I didn't actually adjust my lifestyle. I just cracked on. They said there's nothing we can do. I finally got a diagnosis of post-polio syndrome because they eliminated everything else. And so I just got on with it. And what happened was that I just did too much. I got divorced, I started a business, learned to fly a microlight. Actually, microlight flying is no problem for strength, but I found now the mental stress, driving, for a period there, if I crack forward, for a period there in my 40s, I wasn't doing anything. If I drove to Glasgow and back, I needed 2 days in bed to recover. If I did anything physical on land here now, I get overheated, I lose my concentration, my ability to think is out the window, memory loss, and I won't go all the other things we had all the time. The fatigue that you get when you push it too far is just diabolical. And one of the things was I was given the sleep apnea test at home, and of course I failed it, so they said you got a hospital appointment to confirm it. Of course, that was a period that I'd had about a week in bed without doing anything. I got up and I phoned them and said, look, I just couldn't get there. And they said, well, it's tough, you've lost your place. No further follow-up. So I'm not really happy with the NHS and the way they've treated my case and all of us, because it's denial, and then it's do as little as possible. I turned away from the NHS and I looked at alternative things, and that's not quite true. For that period of decline, I went into quite a bad place. I was unable to get out of bed, work, do anything for quite a long time, and then you get up and then of course you do too much, you swing back, all that stuff. And because I am who I am, you fight it. Not a good idea. So what I'm saying now is I've accepted post-polio syndrome. That's the first thing. Is there anybody here that thinks they can change anything that's happened up till now? Because there isn't. Nobody in the world can change what's happened up till now. But what you can do is address your attitude. The only thing you can change positively is right now this next thought you can choose to have and engage in. And it can either be positive or it can be negative. If you choose to say, I've got this problem, I can't do this, I can't do that, I can't do this, then that's true. If you choose to say, I've got this problem, but within the confines of the limitations that are allowed to me, I can do all these other things if I pace myself, if I do it at the right time, if I take enough rest. And that's what I want to share with you, because I discovered way back about relaxation. It's when my first symptom in my 20s was swallowing problems, and I was choking on food, and I was also losing my voice a lot, and I was a rep, so it was like, that's difficult. And they tested everything, couldn't find anything, so they finally sent me to a speech therapist. And the speech therapist said, you're just straining your vocal cords. You're just doing too much. Learn to relax. And I got, this is way back, 40 years ago, not quite 30 years ago, I got a tape on self-hypnosis, relaxation, and it was amazing. Just learning to properly relax, letting go of the tension. Most pain is caused by tension or inflammation. And I discovered pain that I'd hidden from myself. Deep down, muscles that are tense so long in my tendons. But when you eliminate them, when you eliminate the tension, the pain goes. And sometimes when you know you had pain, when you get rid of it. And so I've done the relaxation stuff. I use self-hypnosis techniques. I don't know if any of you know a guy called Jack Black back in the 80s. Mind Store, it was a way of self-help stuff. And I got into that. And it helped me a lot. And so I had all these techniques to recover. So when I was feeling a problem coming on, I could recover. But generally, it didn't catch it in time at that point, and therefore it was 2 or 3 weeks in bed, and then get up and like, okay, then take it easy this time. Don't go too much. I met this guy, Ali Campbell, who I went to because I have no pension, I have no state income, so I need to start thinking about more income. And I went to learn how to use the hypnosis techniques I used on myself, on other people. And when I was with Ali, there was one weekend course, and I had an episode. And, you know, shaking like that, that's fairly standard. My fine motor skills, I can't play guitar or that. It's coming back, but it was really bad for a while. You know, the Parkinson-like shakes sometimes just take over. The weakness, the thing that got me was when my good leg gave up. 7 years ago, walking across the road, and my good leg just stopped. Just gone. I was that close to a wheelchair. Luckily, for me, I got an electric bike instead. And I got one of the ones with a throttle. And that meant that I didn't have to pedal. I could get out in the fresh air with very little energy spent. And that changed everything. It started a process. Because I then started using my legs a little bit without any effort. And gradually started to pedal a little bit more. Still don't pedal very much. Because on land, any effort, I overheat. But I went back into the pool. After 30 years of not swimming, I went back into the pool and started doing swimming very, very slowly, very, very gently. And I started doing my Tai Chi exercises. Because Tai Chi, I think, as you know, is slow movements, concentration, mind control. But on land, I can't do it. I can't get into that place because constantly, is this the time you're going to fall? Is this the time you're going to fall? Is your leg going to take the strain? You're concentrating. Just even standing here, the whole part of my brain just keep my balance. So I couldn't do Tai Chi on land, but I went into the water and it helped. And then I got into Qigong, which is just breathing and stretching, learning how to connect, relax properly, breathe properly, then get into the stretching and inducing tension, and it becomes a form of effortless exercise. And that sounds crazy, but it works. So all I wanted to do was share with you some of these techniques I've been using, just to give you an idea and to take away with you. Now, okay, here in a room like this, some of you will not feel like doing these things, that's fine, but if you take your attention onto your breathing, and breathe in, always breathe in through your nose. If you're taking nothing else away, breathe in through your nose, deep down in, breathe in slowly. And if you want to, focus by using your hands to make sure your attention is on your breathing. Hold it at the top and exhale. The important part is the holding it at the top, exhaling, holding it at the exhale. Because what you're doing there is taking control of an automatic process, a process that goes on whether you're asleep, even if you're unconscious. If you try and hold your breath too long, your brain will make you unconscious and you'll breathe naturally. So breathing is an automatic process, but you can control it. And once you get hold of controlling your breathing and managing it, you can then change your state. You can do all sorts of wonderful things. I don't have time to go into all that, but the one thing you can do most is relax properly. And getting to relax just means exhaling as slowly as you can. As slowly inhale and as slowly exhale, as slowly as you can. Because as you exhale slowly, your body knows that you're not in fight or flight. You're not in adrenaline move. You're not in aggressive mode or anything like that. You're relaxing, recovering. So exhaling really slowly puts you into a place where you can relax. Relaxing is about finding tension and eliminating it. So we have a thing called progressive relaxation. You've probably heard about it, and some of you get bored thinking about it. But actually, it is incredibly powerful, incredibly quick once you get used to it. And all it means is, as you're breathing in, be aware of some parts of your head, and as you exhale, just feel it relaxing your scalp, your head, your forehead, your eyes, all around your mouth. Exhale. Feel the relaxation flowing down through you. And you can do this at night when you're lying in bed. It turns things off. Just relaxing down all the way down. Take it bit by bit through your body, down to your feet, ankles, toes. And when you do that, that's proper relaxation. It eliminates all the energy we waste on those tense muscles. And those muscles, like when I walk, I'm not walking with the normal muscles that people walk with. I'm using my whole body. You all are. That's energy. And we've got to conserve our energy. We've got to make our energy go further. We've all done it. We've all dipped into the well of energy. And over-dipped. It's run out. That's when the fatigue hits. The trick is to be aware of what you're doing. Plan ahead, like coming down here. I planned 2 days to drive down here. Now I can drive now. I couldn't drive to Glasgow and back. I drove down to York, stayed in York, then I drove to here. And I'll drive back, probably stop off somewhere as well. Because I'm aware that if I push myself to do it, which I could do, I will have a problem later. It's choosing where to put your energy, choosing to put your energy on yourself. I choose to spend time every day relaxing, breathing, meditating, because it works. It gets to the stage where now I can swim better than I swam 30 years ago. Not further. I don't have any stamina, but I can swim better. And I don't overheat, and I take it easy, and then I have a rest. And then I go back and do a wee bit of swimming, and then I have another rest. No exertion, no need to get fatigued. But it's here that matters. It's here choosing. I chose to make a difference in my life by changing some of the things. And the reason I call this all-round well-being is what we've talked about now is breathing and stretching, but it's about lifestyle. It's about saying to yourself, what's right for my all-round well-being? Because I know that beer's bad for me. But I do know also that going to the pub and meeting some friends and having a chat is good for me. So, on balance, a couple of beers of a night, sometimes more than that, is okay for my all-round well-being. I don't have to be sanctimonious about it. I don't have to be nitpicking. I can have a bar of chocolate. It doesn't matter. What matters is what's right for me and what's right for you, because we're all different. So you find that place where you can relax properly. You can get connected with yourself. You can do stretching and exercises that don't take effort. Because when you imagine and visualize a stretch, you're bringing in muscles that you have no conscious control over. Like to do this, if you try to think about it, arm up, you couldn't do it. Your unconscious mind does it. I can rotate the fingers one way or the other way. Use the other hand. I wouldn't be able to work that out. But the muscles involved, when you visualize a stretch or, well, a stretch, if you visualize it, the muscles that get involved become stronger and stronger and stronger, and it's muscles you don't really have control over. But by visualizing it and bring them into play, and that's where the effortless exercise comes in, because you're only thinking about it, and I've just created a huge amount of tension in my arm, and I can just have to take a second to let it go properly, because that's otherwise you get injured. So, and that is the basis. Breathe properly, slowly, and relax. Stretch to use the muscles and get the circulation going without using too much energy. And visualize what you're doing. If you want to pick up a chair, think about it. And you can visualize your body doing it properly, perfectly. If you can do it, once you get used to doing it, you can step out and see yourself doing something and adjust what you're doing. It sounds crazy, but if you try it, you'll really get the benefits, because the visualization puts you, it makes you aware of what you're doing and makes you slow down and do it properly. And it's changed from the stage of me being in a wheelchair to me, I was hoping, it's not going to happen today, I'm sorry, I was hoping to be able to, for the first time in my life, actually stand on my polio leg on balance. It's not going to happen today. I can do it in a pool of water up to here. I can hop on my polio leg. I've got muscles in my polio leg that are twitching and going into cramps I never had. And it's not much of a leg, it's not got any strength. But in the pool up to here, when my weight's taken off, I've actually got some control. I've got muscles changing. I mean, what they did in the 60s to me, I don't know. They've taken all sorts of weight, they've wired up the toes wrong and all sorts of stuff. But within the realms of what I'm able to do, it is amazing what I'm feeling when I get into the pool. And that's why I needed to share it with you, because if some of you just take one and try it and get some results like I'm getting, then brilliant. And I don't think it can do you any harm. And that's the main thing. Okay.
Any questions? I can take a couple.
One very quick. You said you got first identified post-polio syndrome. So you got 20. That's quite incredible.
When did you actually contract polio?
I had polio when I was 2. I was okay and I trained hard, so I knew my body. And then when in the 20s I started to try and train again to get fit, it didn't work. So I knew something was wrong, just didn't know what. It took 10 years before I actually got the post-polio.
Well, mine didn't kick in until about I was 46, 47, something like that. I mean, I've had a hell of an active life. I mean, really active.
Yeah. It's one of these strange things, isn't it? None of us are the same, no two of us are the same with post-polio, and it's a little bit of a disease, because it comes out of nowhere and grabs you. Even no, I was in a caliper for a while. I was ready for a wheelchair, but I had no support now. These are even the same size shoes with a medium step load. I didn't bother anymore. I gave up on all the NHS stuff.
Thank you very much. That's the record again, I think. Once again, I'd like to thank all the speakers this afternoon. I think they're all been wonderful in their own way. And thank you very much. Thank you. You can now all go home. So, if you don't mind, maybe go around the asking for badges. And there's a goodie bag for everybody. So you got a goodie bag. Thank you.
He stood here most of the day introducing different people. Can we have a round of applause for Griffin, please?
Is that okay? Are you alright with that, Rachel? I will get Rachel, there's 2 more batteries in the bags as well. Okay.